The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened with an urgency that hadn't been felt in 3,000 years. Representatives from 47 species materialized through quantum transmission arrays, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that the universal translators struggled to process. At the center of the crystalline amphitheater, High Counselor Zeth Kara of the Altarian hegemony stood with 3 of her 4 arms raised in distress. "The Devourers have returned," she announced, her melodious voice carrying across the chamber like funeral bells. Long-range sensors confirm it. 700 vessels, each the size of a moon, emerging from dark space near the outer rim. The Kepler defense grid fell in 6 hours. The Tau Ceti colonies, they're gone. A collective intake of breath equivalents rippled through the assembly. The Devourers were legend, nightmare stories told to young beings across the galaxy. A machine intelligence that consumed entire worlds, breaking them down into base materials to fuel their endless expansion. They had vanished 5 millennia ago, after the Great War that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization. Senator Thymos of the Regelian Republic leaned forward on his hover platform. How long before they reached the core worlds? At their current rate of advance, 18 standard months. Zeth Kara replied, maybe less if they acquire additional resources from conquered systems. The chamber erupted in panicked discussions. The great military powers began calculating fleet movements and defensive strategies, but everyone present knew the grim mathematics. The last time the Devourers had emerged, it had taken the combined might of 12 species and 1,000 years of war to drive them back. Now, the galaxy was softer, more civilized. Many of the warrior races had evolved beyond their aggressive natures or had been bred out of existence. General Vorthan of the Hegemony Defense Force materialized a holographic display showing current military assets. Our latest intelligence suggests we can field perhaps 60% of the combined forces that fought in the Great War. The crystalline fleets number only a quarter of their ancient strength. The Zephyrian Mind Guard maintains perhaps 30 active squadrons compared to the 300 they once commanded. The situation is challenging. Challenging? Ambassador Kretak of the Insectoid Collective clicked his mandibles in what his species considered bitter laughter. We're discussing the potential extinction of galactic civilization. I'd call that considerably more than challenging. High Admiral Zirion of the Nexus Collective accessed the tactical data through his neural interface. The Devourers' technology will have advanced during their dormancy period. Our defensive improvements pale in comparison to their likely offensive capabilities. Standard engagement protocols suggest a 14% probability of successful defense. Silence fell across the chamber like a shroud. 14%. Even the most optimistic projections had never calculated odds that low for any major military engagement in recorded galactic history. There must be something, Zeth Kara insisted. Some ally we haven't considered, some force we've overlooked. Senator Thymos accessed his databanks. We've contacted every registered military power in the galaxy. The warrior clans of Proxima are rebuilding after their civil war. The Shogun worlds are dealing with internal strife. The mercenary guilds are willing to fight, but their numbers are insufficient for this scale of conflict. A new voice echoed through the chamber, elderly and precise. What about the unregistered military powers? All attention turned to historian Ethmara, the ancient keeper of galactic records. Her species had observed and documented the rise and fall of civilizations for over 10,000 years, but rarely spoke in council sessions.
Unregistered? General Vorthan's confusion was evident.
All significant military forces are registered with the Defense Coordination Bureau. It's been mandatory for 3 millennia. Ethmara's compound eyes glittered with what might have been amusement. Mandatory for members of galactic civilization, yes. But what about species that haven't achieved full membership? Species that are still considered primitive? Senator Thymos accessed his files again. The developing worlds? Their technology is centuries behind our own. Most haven't even perfected faster than light travel. What possible contribution could they make? Have any of you actually studied their military capabilities? Ethmara asked. Or have you simply dismissed them based on technological assessments? The uncomfortable silence that followed spoke volumes. The galactic community had a long history of technological snobbery. Species were judged by their scientific achievements, their cultural refinement, their ability to integrate into galactic society. Military prowess without advanced technology was considered barbaric, a relic of less enlightened times. There is one species in particular, Ethmara continued, that might warrant consideration. They've been under observation for approximately 2 centuries. Their homeworld designation is Sol 3, locally known as Earth. The species calls itself humanity, or Homo sapiens. General Vorthan pulled up their file with evident skepticism. Humans? They're barely capable of interstellar travel. Their ships use chemical propulsion and basic fusion drives. Their weapons are primarily kinetic projectiles and explosive devices. They haven't even developed energy shielding or quantum tunneling weapons. True, FMAR acknowledged, but examine their military history. In the past 5,000 years, they've engaged in continuous warfare. Not occasional conflicts over resources or territory, but constant, evolving military engagement. They've developed tactics and strategies for every conceivable combat scenario. Admiral Zirion processed this information through his tactical analysis protocols. Continuous warfare would suggest inefficient conflict resolution, a sign of primitive social development. Or exceptional combat experience, FMAR countered. Consider this. They've fought wars in every environment their planet offers. Underground, underwater, in the air, in space, in frozen wastelands, burning deserts, dense forests, and urban environments. They've mastered siege warfare, guerrilla tactics, combined arms operations, and asymmetric conflict. Senator Timos looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Even if their tactical knowledge is extensive, their technology simply cannot compete with Devourer systems. Energy weapons versus kinetic projectiles? Quantum shields versus chemical explosives? The disparity is enormous. Is it? Athmara asked quietly. Have any of you considered that our advanced technology might be exactly what the Devourers expect? They've fought us before. They know our weapons, our shields, our tactical doctrines, but they've never encountered humanity's approach to warfare. Zefkara felt a strange stirring of something that might have been hope. What do you mean? Humans don't fight like we do, Ithmara explained. We engage in warfare as a necessary evil, seeking to minimize casualties and preserve civilization. We follow established protocols, maintain defensive positions, and attempt to resolve conflicts through technological superiority. Humans fight to win, regardless of cost or convention. They adapt their tactics to exploit enemy weaknesses rather than relying solely on superior firepower. The chamber remained skeptical, but Ethmara pressed on. I've observed 17 major human conflicts in the past century. In each case, the technologically superior force eventually fell to human ingenuity, determination, and willingness to employ unconventional tactics. They don't just adapt to changing circumstances. They deliberately create chaos that favors their approach to combat. General Vorthan's military training warred with his technological prejudices. Even assuming their tactical abilities are as impressive as you suggest, how could primitive kinetic weapons possibly affect Devourer technology? The Devourers are machines, Ethmara pointed out. Complex, sophisticated machines, but machines nonetheless. Human history is filled with examples of complex systems being defeated by simple, unexpected approaches. They call it thinking outside the box. High Admiral Zirion ran probability calculations through his enhanced neural cortex. The scenario has too many variables for accurate prediction. However, if humans possess the tactical flexibility you describe, they might serve as an effective irregular force to support our main battle fleets. An irregular force? Zefkara asked. Asymmetric warfare, Admiral Zirion explained. Small unit tactics designed to disrupt enemy operations rather than engage in direct combat. Harassment, sabotage, intelligence gathering. Their technological limitations might actually be advantageous for such operations, as they'd be less detectable to advanced sensor arrays. The idea gained momentum as the council members began to grasp its potential. A species accustomed to fighting against overwhelming odds, unencumbered by the civilized rules of engagement that governed galactic warfare, might indeed prove valuable as auxiliary forces. But would they even respond to our request? Senator Tynus asked. They're not members of galactic civilization. They have no obligation to assist us, and their world would be among the last to face direct threat from the Devourers. Actually, Ethmara said, with what her species used for a smile, based on my psychological profiles of human leadership, I believe they'd be quite interested in the challenge. They have a cultural concept they call standing up to bullies. Zefkara found herself making a decision that surprised her own careful nature. Very well. Contact this humanity, explain the situation, and request their assistance. What's the worst that could happen? They could say no, General Vorthan pointed out. Given our current odds, Admiral Zarian observed, that might not actually qualify as the worst possible outcome. The quantum communication array powered up, preparing to send humanity's first official invitation to join galactic civilization. None of the assembled representatives quite realized they were about to learn the difference between fighting to preserve civilization and fighting to utterly destroy your enemies. In the depths of space, the Devourer fleet continued its inexorable advance toward the core worlds, their ancient programming driving them to consume and expand. Their tactical computers had already analyzed the likely galactic response based on historical data from their last encounter. They expected energy weapons, quantum shields, and the careful defensive strategies that characterized civilized warfare. They had no data files on humanity. The message hurtled across space at faster-than-light speeds, carrying with it the desperate hope of 47 civilizations and the unknowing catalyst that would reshape galactic warfare forever. Earth's response would arrive in 72 hours, and when it did, the galaxy would discover that humans had been preparing for this fight their entire evolutionary history. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the war room of Terran Defense Command, staring at the holographic display that had fundamentally altered humanity's understanding of their place in the universe. The message from the Galactic Council had arrived 6 hours ago, and the implications were still sinking in. They weren't alone. They never had been. "Run it again, Marcus," she said to her intelligence chief. Colonel Marcus Webb activated the playback. The alien figure materialized in 3 dimensions. Its crystalline form refracting light in impossible patterns. The voice, processed through some kind of universal translation system, spoke with formal precision. "Greetings, people of Earth. I am High Counselor Zefkar of the Altarian Hegemony, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Council. Our long-range observation posts have monitored your species' development with great interest, though we have not previously made contact due to your developing status within galactic civilization." Several staff officers exchanged glances at the subtle condescension, but Chen remained focused on the content. "We now face a crisis that threatens all sentient life in this galaxy. An ancient enemy known as the Devourers has returned from dark space. They are a machine intelligence dedicated to consuming all matter and energy to fuel their expansion. Previous encounters with this force have resulted in the devastation of entire sectors." The hologram shifted to display massive geometric ships, each one dwarfing Earth's largest space stations. The scale was almost impossible to comprehend. "Our combined military forces estimate a 14% probability of successful defense using conventional tactics and available resources. Therefore, we are reaching out to all potential allies, including species not yet fully integrated into galactic civilization. We request any military assistance your people might be able to provide." The message concluded with detailed technical specifications of Devourer technology, fleet compositions, and tactical assessments from previous conflicts. What struck Chen most forcefully wasn't the alien technology or the scope of the threat. It was the underlying assumption that humanity's contribution would be minimal and largely symbolic. "Your analysis, Colonel?" she asked Webb. "They're desperate," Webb replied bluntly. "The formal language can't hide it. They're asking for help from a species they clearly consider primitive. That suggests they've exhausted all other options." Chen nodded, then addressed the room. "Comments?" General Patricia Hayes, head of strategic planning, leaned forward. "Their assessment of our technology is accurate but incomplete. Yes, our ships use chemical propulsion and fusion drives. Yes, our weapons are primarily kinetic and explosive, but they're viewing these as limitations rather than design choices."
"Explain," Chen said.
Every weapon system they described, energy beams, quantum disruptors, matter converters, requires enormous power generation and complex technical infrastructure. They're vulnerable to electromagnetic interference, power system failures, and supply chain disruptions. Our primitive kinetic weapons are actually more reliable under adverse conditions. Captain Lisa Rodriguez from Tactical Analysis nodded in agreement. "I've been studying their battle footage from the previous war. They fight like they're conducting a scientific experiment. Measured, predictable, following established protocols. The Devourers adapted to their tactics because those tactics never fundamentally changed." "And our tactics would be different how?" Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "We don't have established protocols for interstellar warfare," Rodriguez replied with a slight smile. "We'd have to innovate in real time, which means the enemy couldn't predict our responses. Plus, our entire military tradition is based on defeating technologically superior opponents through superior strategy, logistics, and sheer bloody-minded determination." Admiral Chen felt the first stirrings of what her grandfather might have called battle fever. The challenge was enormous, perhaps impossible, but it was exactly the kind of fight that humanity had been preparing for throughout its violent history. "What about the technological gap?" asked Dr. Elizabeth Vance from the Science Division. "Their energy shields could potentially negate our kinetic weapons entirely." Webb called up the technical specifications. Actually, their shielding seems designed to disperse energy attacks and deflect high-velocity impacts. But look at these power consumption figures. Those shields require massive energy inputs to maintain effectiveness. Sustained kinetic bombardment might overload their capacity. Like trying to stop a river with a tennis racket, Hayes observed. You might deflect some of the water, but eventually you'll be overwhelmed. Chen began to see the shape of a strategy forming. What's our current fleet strength? 1,200 active warships across all classes. Webb replied. Another 800 in various stages of construction or refit, plus approximately 3,000 support vessels, transports, and auxiliary craft. Compared to their estimate of enemy strength? 700 Devourer ships, but each one masses approximately 50 times our largest vessels. In a direct engagement, the outcome would be unfavorable. But we wouldn't engage directly, Chen mused. At least not initially. What about our industrial capacity? Dr. Vance accessed her files. Our shipyards could potentially triple current production rates with full military mobilization. The asteroid mining operations could provide raw materials for as many ships as we can build. The real limitation would be trained crew members. Training can be accelerated, Hayes pointed out. We've done it before, during major conflicts. The bigger question is whether we want to commit our entire civilization to a war that isn't directly threatening Earth. The room fell silent as the weight of that observation settled in. The Devourers were advancing from the galaxy's edge, and Earth lay near the outer rim of one spiral arm. In the short term, humanity was relatively safe. They could potentially ignore the conflict entirely and hope for the best. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the massive display showing known galactic geography. 47 civilizations scattered across hundreds of thousands of star systems, billions of sentient beings facing extinction, and all of them more technically advanced than humanity. The sensible choice was obvious. Colonel Webb, what do we know about the Galactic military's combat doctrine? Based on the historical data they provided, they prefer long-range engagement with energy weapons, supported by defensive formations using energy shields and point defense systems. Very organized, very efficient, very predictable. They seem to view warfare as a problem to be solved through technological superiority. And how do we view warfare? Webb's smile was predatory. As a problem to be solved through whatever means necessary to achieve victory. Chen turned back to her staff. I want operational plans for 3 scenarios. First, defensive support for galactic forces using our current fleet strength. Second, rapid fleet expansion with full industrial mobilization. Third, unconventional warfare options that exploit our technological differences rather than trying to match their capabilities. Admiral, Dr. Vance interjected. Are we seriously considering committing Earth's entire military to a war between alien civilizations? I'm considering, Chen replied, what kind of species we want to be when the galaxy's history books are written. Do we want to be the ones who stood by while civilizations died because it wasn't technically our problem? Or do we want to be the ones who showed up when nobody else could handle the job? The room buzzed with activity as staff officers began preliminary planning. But Chen remained focused on the tactical implications of humanity's unique position. They were the wild card that nobody, including the enemy, would see coming. Rodriguez, she called. I want detailed analysis of every Devourer engagement from the historical records. Look for patterns, weaknesses, anything that suggests inflexibility in their tactical programming. Already on it, Admiral. Initial assessment suggests they adapt to enemy capabilities, but not to enemy intentions. They respond to what you're doing, but they don't seem to anticipate what you might do next.
That observation triggered something in Chen's tactical intuition.
Machine intelligence, no matter how sophisticated, was still fundamentally reactive rather than creative. They could process vast amounts of data and optimize their responses, but they might struggle with truly unexpected approaches to combat. Hayes, I want you to start thinking about this from a completely different angle. Not space combat as we understand it, but space warfare as it might be conducted by a species that learned to fight in caves and trenches and city streets. General Hayes raised an eyebrow. Guerrilla warfare in space? Why not? The basic principles remain the same. Know the terrain, strike where the enemy isn't expecting, make them fight on your terms instead of theirs. The terrain is just 3-dimensional and measured in light years instead of kilometers. The planning session continued for another 4 hours, with various specialists contributing expertise from their fields. By the time they concluded, humanity had outlined the basics of what would become known as the Terra Doctrine asymmetric space warfare. based on mobility, unpredictability, and absolute commitment to victory regardless of cost. Admiral Chen composed her reply to the Galactic Council with careful consideration. The message needed to be diplomatic enough to maintain good relations with potential allies, but clear enough to establish humanity's terms of engagement. High Counselor Zethkara, we acknowledge receipt of your request for military assistance and appreciate your inclusion of humanity in galactic affairs. After careful consideration of the threat assessment and tactical situation, we are prepared to contribute to the defense against the Devourer invasion. However, we must clarify our operational approach. Human military doctrine differs significantly from established galactic norms. We do not engage in defensive warfare or limited conflict. If we commit our forces to this fight, we will be seeking the complete destruction of the enemy threat, not merely its containment or repulsion. We will require complete tactical autonomy for human forces, with coordination but not subordination to galactic command structures. Our methods may appear unconventional, or even disturbing to species accustomed to civilized warfare. We fight to win, not to preserve the existing order. If these terms are acceptable, we can have advanced forces in position within 6 standard months, with full fleet deployment following within 1 year. Earth's industrial capacity will be fully mobilized for military production until the threat is eliminated. We look forward to working with our galactic neighbors. The Devourers are about to learn why humanity has spent its entire evolutionary history preparing for war. Chen read through the message one final time, then transmitted it through the quantum communication array. The die was cast. Humanity was about to make its debut on the galactic stage, and it wouldn't be as junior partners or auxiliary forces. They were coming as equals, whether the galaxy was ready for them or not. Across the solar system, shipyards began expanding production schedules. Research facilities started crash programs to adapt human technology for interstellar warfare, and military academies prepared to train a new generation of officers for combat scenarios no human had ever imagined. The Devourers had awakened from their long sleep, expecting to face the same civilized opponents they had fought before. Instead, they were about to encounter a species that had never learned to fight fair, never accepted defeat as inevitable, and never understood the concept of acceptable losses. Humanity was going to war, and this time they weren't fighting each other. The combined fleet staging area at Kepler Station represented the largest military gathering in galactic history. Crystalline ships from the Altarian hegemony floated like living gems beside the angular metal constructs of the Nexus Collective. Zephyrian vessels, more energy than matter, pulsed with telepathic coordination signals. Representatives from 43 civilizations had answered the call, bringing their most advanced warships and their finest tactical minds. And somewhere in that vast armada, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the TCS Indomitable, humanity's new flagship, trying to hide her amazement at finding herself in the middle of what looked like a science fiction fever dream. The Indomitable was humanity's answer to galactic naval architecture. 800 meters of armored steel, fusion reactors, and enough kinetic weapons to level a small moon. Compared to the sleek energy-based vessels surrounding it, the human ship looked like a medieval battering ram at a ballet recital. But Chen was beginning to suspect that might be exactly what this situation required. Admiral, her communications officer reported, "We're receiving a priority message from the Galactic Fleet Command. Admiral Vexay of the Hegemony requests your presence at the Strategic Planning Conference." Chen had been expecting this summons. The galactic leadership had been politely skeptical about humanity's contribution from the moment their forces arrived. The human fleet, 250 ships, was impressive by Earth standards, but dwarfed by the alien armadas. More concerning to the galactic commanders was humanity's insistence on maintaining independent operational authority. "Tell Admiral Vexay I'll be there in 10 minutes, Chen replied. "And Marcus, I want you monitoring all fleet communications while I'm gone. Something about this tactical situation doesn't feel right." Colonel Webb nodded from his position at the intelligence station. "What specifically is bothering you?" "The positioning," Chen said, studying the fleet deployment on her tactical display. "We're arranged in a perfect defensive formation. Exactly the kind of organized response the Devourers will be expecting. It's like we're following a textbook they've already read. The Strategic Planning Conference was held aboard the Hegemon's Might, a crystalline battleship that dwarfed anything in Earth's fleet. Chen was transported via energy beam, an experience that left her slightly nauseous but impressed by galactic technology, and found herself in a conference chamber that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Admiral Vexay of the Altarian hegemony dominated the space with her four-armed elegance, while High Admiral Zerian of the Nexus Collective interfaced directly with holographic displays through his neural implants. Representatives from dozens of other species filled various environmental niches around the chamber. Admiral Chen, Vexay began with careful courtesy, "We've reviewed your fleet's capabilities and believe we have found an appropriate role for human forces in the upcoming engagement." Chen suppressed her immediate reaction. "I'm listening. Your ship's kinetic weapons and heavy armor make them ideal for close support operations," Admiral Zirian explained, his mechanical voice carrying artificial precision. "We propose positioning human vessels in reserve formations ready to provide defensive fire support for our main battle lines. In other words," Chen said carefully, "you want us to sit in the back and watch while you handle the actual fighting." The uncomfortable silence that followed suggested her translation was accurate. "Your vessels are simply not equipped for primary engagement roles," Vexay explained. Devourer technology requires energy-based countermeasures and quantum-level tactical responses. Your kinetic weapons, while formidable by your species standards, would have minimal effect on their adaptive shielding. Chen had expected this attitude, but she was still frustrated by it. "Admiral, with respect, you're making assumptions about our tactical capabilities based on our technology rather than our results. Has anyone here actually studied human military history?" "We are aware of your species' violent past," Admiral Zirian replied. "However, historical conflicts between primitive forces have little relevance to advanced space warfare." "Do they?" Chen asked. She activated her portable holographic projector, displaying tactical data from Earth's military archives. "This is the Battle of Thermopylae, fought with bronze weapons and wooden shields. 300 Spartans held off a force 50 times their size. This is the Battle of Britain, where outnumbered pilots defeated technologically superior opponents through superior tactics and determination. This is the Siege of Stalingrad, where an entire army was destroyed by defenders using improvised weapons and urban warfare techniques." The alien commanders studied the historical displays with polite interest, but Chen could see they remained unconvinced. Each of these battles was won by forces that understood something their technologically superior enemies didn't. Chen continued. "They understood that wars aren't won by the best equipment or the most advanced technology. They're won by whoever adapts faster, fights harder, and refuses to accept defeat." "Admirable philosophy," Vexay acknowledged, "but the Devourers are not a conventional enemy. They're a machine intelligence with perfect tactical coordination and adaptive countermeasures. They learn from every engagement and modify their responses accordingly. Then we need to give them something they can't learn from." Chen replied, "Something so unprecedented that their adaptive programming can't process it effectively." High Admiral Zerian's mechanical face actually showed something resembling curiosity. "What do you propose?" Chen had been hoping someone would ask that question. "Complete tactical autonomy for human forces, with coordination through Galactic Command, but not subordination. Let us engage the Devourers using our own methods while your fleets maintain conventional operations. That would create dangerous coordination problems," Admiral Vexay pointed out. "Mixed tactical doctrines often result in friendly fire incidents and strategic confusion." "Not if you stop thinking of us as auxiliary forces," Chen suggested. "Think of us as a separate theater of operations entirely. You engage the Devourers according to your tactical doctrine, and we engage them according to ours. They'll have to adapt to two completely different approaches simultaneously." The conference chamber buzzed with translated discussions as various species debated the proposal. Chen waited patiently, knowing that the Galactic commanders were facing an uncomfortable choice between accepting human autonomy and potentially losing the war with conventional tactics. "What exactly would your tactical approach involve?" asked Commander Torval of the warrior clans. Chen smiled, and several of the alien representatives instinctively stepped back. There was something predatory in that expression that transcended species barriers. "We're going to make them angry," she said simply. "Angry?" Vexay's crystalline features managed to convey confusion. "The Devourers are machines. They don't experience emotions." "No, but they have programming priorities," Chen explained. "They're designed to expand efficiently, consuming resources and eliminating threats in the most logical manner possible." "What happens when you force a machine intelligence to respond to completely illogical threats?" Admiral Zirion processed this through his tactical analysis systems. Theoretical result would be increased resource allocation to threat assessment and response protocols, reducing efficiency in primary operational parameters.
Exactly.
While they're trying to figure out what we're doing and why, they're not optimally processing their main objectives. That creates opportunities for conventional forces to exploit. The discussion continued for another 2 hours, with various commanders raising objections and concerns about coordination protocols. But eventually, the mathematics of the situation became clear. With a 14% probability of success using conventional tactics, any alternative approach deserved consideration. Very well. Admiral Vex Hay finally announced. Human forces will operate with tactical autonomy, coordinating through galactic command structures but maintaining independent operational authority. However, we expect regular situation reports and compliance with strategic objectives. Agreed, Chen replied, though she suspected her definition of strategic objectives might differ significantly from theirs. The conference concluded with detailed planning sessions for fleet coordination, communication protocols, and engagement sequences. But as Chen prepared to return to her flagship, Admiral Zirian approached her privately. "I am curious about one aspect of your tactical planning," he said. "Your historical examples all involve defensive scenarios where inferior forces delayed or defeated superior attackers, but the Devourers are advancing toward populated worlds. This is fundamentally an offensive operation requiring aggressive engagement." Chen's smile was even more predatory than before. "Admiral, you're making the same mistake everyone makes about human military doctrine. You think we learned to fight in defense of our homes and families? Did you not?" "No," Chen replied quietly. "We learned to fight by conquering our entire planet. Every major human civilization was built on the bones of the one that came before it. We didn't perfect warfare to defend what we had. We perfected it to take what we wanted." She paused, watching various forms of alarm register across Zerian's mechanical features. "The only difference this time is that what we want happens to coincide with galactic survival. The Devourers are about to learn the difference between fighting a defensive war and fighting humans who have decided you need to be eliminated." Returning to the Indomitable, Chen found Colonel Webb waiting with updated intelligence reports and tactical assessments from the human fleet commanders. "The alien formations are exactly what we expected," Webb reported. "Defensive screens, overlapping fields of fire, organized retreat protocols for damaged vessels. It's a perfectly rational approach to superior firepower, and completely useless against an enemy that's designed to overwhelm rational defenses," Chen observed. "What about our positioning? All human vessels are in assigned support positions, as requested. But Captain Rodriguez has been analyzing the Devourer approach vectors, and she thinks she's found something interesting." Captain Rodriguez materialized on the tactical display via quantum link from her ship, the TCS Relentless. "Admiral, I've been studying the enemy's advance pattern, and I think I know why they've been so successful against galactic forces in the past." "Show me." The tactical display shifted to show Devourer fleet movements from historical engagements. They don't actually engage in ship-to-ship combat in the traditional sense. Their tactical computers identify the optimal formation for maximum fire-upper efficiency, then they maintain that formation regardless of enemy responses. It's like they're running a program rather than fighting a battle. Chen studied the data, beginning to see the pattern. They optimize for mathematical superiority rather than tactical flexibility. Exactly. Which means they're vulnerable to any opponent who deliberately creates mathematically suboptimal situations. Such as, Rodriguez's grin was visible even through the quantum transmission, such as refusing to maintain formation integrity, engaging from unpredictable angles, and generally fighting like psychotic pirates instead of a disciplined fleet. Chen felt the pieces of her strategy falling into place. The galactic forces would provide the organized, predictable opposition that the Devourers expected to face. Meanwhile, human forces would create chaos, forcing the enemy's tactical computers to constantly recalculate optimal responses. "Send word to all human ship commanders," she ordered. "Operational briefing in 6 hours. I want every captain to understand that when we engage the Devourers, we're not fighting to preserve the existing order. We're fighting to completely destroy the enemy's ability to function as a coherent force." "What about coordination with Galactic Command?" Webb asked. Chen considered this for a moment, then made a decision that would reshape the nature of interstellar warfare. "We'll coordinate with them," she said finally. "But we're not fighting their kind of war. We're going to show this galaxy what happens when humans decide something needs to be completely eliminated." The Devourer fleet continued its advance, their tactical computers processing data from long-range sensors and preparing optimal engagement protocols. Their analysis indicated 47 species following predictable defensive strategies with energy-based weapons and conventional formations. What their computers couldn't process was the psychological profile of a species that had never learned to fight fair, never accepted tactical limitations as unchangeable facts, and never understood the concept of proportional response. Humanity was coming to their first galactic war, with 5,000 years of experience in making their enemies regret starting fights. The Devourers were about to discover why humans had conquered their entire homeworld before they even knew other species existed. The first contact with the Devourer fleet occurred in the Proxima Centauri system, 3 light-years from the main galactic defensive line. Long-range sensors detected the enemy formation 18 hours before visual confirmation. 700 vessels arranged in perfect geometric precision, advancing at 0.7 light speed toward the core worlds. Admiral Vexay stood in the command center of the combined galactic fleet, watching tactical displays that showed the approaching nightmare with crystalline clarity. Each Devourer ship massed approximately 50,000 tons and carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Their formation was mathematically perfect, optimized for maximum offensive capability with overlapping defensive fields. All fleet commanders report ready status. Admiral Zirian announced through the communication network. Defensive formations are in position, energy shields at maximum efficiency. All vessels are prepared to engage according to established protocols. The galactic fleet stretched across 300,000 kilometers of space, organized into 7 defensive layers, with carefully calculated firing solutions and retreat vectors. It was the culmination of 3,000 years of strategic military development, supported by the most advanced technology in galactic civilization. And Admiral Sarah Chen was about to completely ignore all of it. TCS Indomitable to Galactic Command. Chen's voice crackled through the communication array with interference that suggested her ship was already moving. Human forces are beginning independent operations. We'll coordinate through tactical updates, but we're not following defensive positioning. Admiral Chen, Vexay responded with barely controlled alarm. The defensive formation requires all vessels to maintain assigned positions. Your deviation could compromise the entire fleet's tactical integrity. That's the idea. Chen replied, and Vexay could hear the smile in her voice. We're not here to maintain your formation. We're here to win. The tactical display updated to show human vessel movements, and Admiral Zirian's mechanical mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Instead of maintaining position in the defensive line, human ships were scattering in apparently random directions. Some were accelerating directly toward the Devourer fleet. Others were moving perpendicular to the engagement zone. Still others were falling back beyond the galactic formation entirely. This is chaos, Admiral Vexay declared. There's no pattern to their movements, no coordination without tactical plan. Perhaps that's the point, suggested Commander Torval, from his position with the warrior clan vessels. I've been studying human military history, as Admiral Chen suggested. Their species has a concept called organized chaos, maintaining overall strategic objectives while allowing individual units complete tactical freedom. The Devourer fleet detected the approaching human vessels and began calculating optimal response protocols. Their tactical computers identified the scattered formations as disorganized resistance and allocated minimal resources to neutralizing what appeared to be undisciplined retreat behavior. That assessment lasted exactly 17 minutes. The TCS Relentless, under Captain Rodriguez's command, had accelerated to maximum velocity on a trajectory that would take it directly through the center of the Devourer formation. Every galactic commander watching the tactical display assumed it was a suicide run, a desperate attempt to inflict damage before inevitable destruction. Instead, Rodriguez executed a maneuver that violated every principle of space combat known to galactic military science. At a distance of 50,000 kilometers from the enemy fleet, the Relentless fired every kinetic weapon in its arsenal, not at the Devourer ships, but at empty space in front of their formation. Hundreds of tungsten projectiles spread across the enemy's path like a 3-dimensional minefield, each one moving at 20% of light speed. What is she doing? Admiral Vexay asked in bewilderment. She's wasting her ammunition on empty space. No, Admiral Zirion replied as his tactical computers finally processed the human strategy. She's creating an obstacle field. The Devourers will have to adjust their formation to avoid collision with those projectiles. The Devourer tactical computers detected the kinetic barrage and calculated optimal avoidance procedures. 300 vessels began minor course corrections to avoid the scattered projectiles. Small adjustments that wouldn't significantly impact their overall formation integrity. Except the projectiles weren't the real attack. The TCS Relentless had fired its kinetic weapons as cover for deploying something far more dangerous. 30,000 micro-drones, each no larger than a baseball, scattered throughout the space around the Devourer fleet. The drones were too small to register on enemy sensors and too numerous for point defense systems to target effectively. Rodriguez had just introduced the Devourers to humanity's most fundamental tactical innovation: improvised explosive devices. The drones activated simultaneously, each one detonating its nuclear payload in a carefully coordinated pattern designed to create maximum electromagnetic interference across the enemy formation. The explosions weren't powerful enough to destroy Devourer ships, but they generated massive energy pulses that overloaded sensor arrays and disrupted communication networks. For the first time in 5,000 years, the Devourer fleet lost tactical coordination. Now Admiral Chen's voice echoed across the human fleet communication network. All vessels execute Sierra Protocol. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for the next millennium. Human ships that had appeared to be retreating in disorder suddenly reversed course, accelerating toward the Devourer formation from dozens of different angles. Ships that had moved perpendicular to the engagement zone began flanking maneuvers that brought them into optimal firing positions. Vessels that had charged directly toward the enemy revealed themselves to have been deploying additional obstacle fields and electronic countermeasures. The human fleet wasn't fighting like a coordinated military force. They were fighting like a pack of wolves, individual hunters working toward a common goal but adapting their tactics in real time based on opportunity and instinct rather than predetermined plans. Captain Torres of the TCS Conquistador found herself facing 3 Devourer vessels that had been isolated from their formation by the electromagnetic interference. Her ship's kinetic weapons couldn't penetrate their energy shields in a direct engagement, so she didn't try. Instead, she accelerated past them at maximum velocity, firing grappling cables that attached to their hulls. The Devourer ships tried to shake loose from the cables, but Torres had anticipated this. The cables were designed to tighten under tension, and she was dragging 3 enemy vessels behind her ship like a string of tin cans. "All human vessels, this is Conquistador," she broadcast. "I've got 3 tangos on a leash. Someone want to take some target practice?" The response was immediate. 4 human ships converged on Torres's position, using the grappled Devourer vessels as stationary targets for concentrated kinetic bombardment. The enemy ship's energy shields were designed to disperse the impact of individual projectiles, but they couldn't handle sustained fire from multiple angles while being dragged through space by steel cables. All 3 Devourer ships were destroyed within 90 seconds. Admiral Vexai watched the tactical display with growing amazement and horror. This is completely contrary to established military doctrine. They're treating space combat like atmospheric fighter operations. Worse than that, Admiral Zirian observed. They're treating it like infantry combat. Small unit tactics, improvised weapons, individual initiative rather than formation discipline. It's... He paused, searching for the appropriate term. It's primitive, but it's working, Commander Torval pointed out. Indeed, the Devourer fleet was beginning to show signs of systematic breakdown. Their tactical computers had been designed to counter organized military opposition using established strategic principles. They could adapt to new weapons or defensive technologies, but they struggled to process opponents who deliberately violated basic tactical assumptions. The human fleet continued its chaotic assault, with individual ships creating opportunities for each other without any apparent central coordination. Captain Morrison of the TCS Thunderbolt had discovered that Devourer energy shields couldn't deflect physical objects moving below a certain velocity threshold, so she was literally throwing chunks of asteroid at enemy ships using her cargo manipulator arms. Captain Zhang of the TCS Defiant had noticed that Devourer point defense systems targeted incoming projectiles based on velocity and trajectory calculations. So he began firing kinetic rounds in wide arcs that curved around the enemy ships before striking them from unexpected angles. Captain Okafor of the TCS Unstoppable was using her ship's industrial cutting lasers, never intended as weapons, to slice through Devourer hull armor, while her kinetic weapons kept their attention focused elsewhere. Admiral Chen, Vexai finally transmitted, "Your forces are achieving remarkable results, but this level of tactical chaos makes it impossible for our conventional forces to provide support." "Then don't," Chen replied. "Execute your defensive plan exactly as designed. Let the Devourers divide their attention between your organized formation and our chaotic attacks. They can't optimize their responses for both approaches simultaneously." The wisdom of this strategy became apparent as the battle developed. The Devourer fleet found itself caught between 2 completely incompatible threats. Their tactical computers allocated resources to counter the Galactic fleet's organized defensive formations while simultaneously trying to respond to the humans' unpredictable individual attacks. For the first time since their awakening, the Devourers were being forced to fight reactively, rather than dictating the terms of engagement. Captain Rodriguez of the Relentless discovered the ultimate expression of human tactical philosophy when she found herself facing a damaged Devourer vessel that had lost main power but still possessed functional weapons. Instead of engaging in a prolonged firefight, she did something that no other species would have considered. She rammed it. The Relentless, built with heavy armor and redundant systems, punched through the Devourer ship's hull like a bullet through paper. Rodriguez then activated her ship's self-destruct sequence while evacuating her crew to escape pods, turning her vessel into a guided missile that detonated inside the enemy ship. Both vessels were destroyed in the explosion, but Rodriguez's sacrifice eliminated a Devourer command ship whose loss disrupted tactical coordination for an entire enemy squadron. She destroyed her own ship, Admiral Vexahe whispered in shock. She deliberately sacrificed a valuable military asset to eliminate a single enemy vessel. It's not about preserving assets, Admiral Zirion realized. They're fighting for total victory regardless of cost. They're willing to trade one ship for one enemy ship because they believe they can replace their losses faster than the enemy can adapt to their tactics. The battle raged for 18 hours, and by its conclusion, the tactical situation had fundamentally changed. The Devourer fleet had lost 230 vessels, not to superior firepower or advanced technology, but to complete tactical unpredictability. Their computer systems had been overwhelmed trying to process and counter human strategies that violated every principle of logical military engagement. The human fleet had lost 67 ships, including the Relentless, and 12 others whose captains had chosen suicide attacks when conventional tactics proved insufficient. But more importantly, they had proven that the Devourers could be defeated. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, surveying damage reports and casualty figures while her crew worked to restore damaged systems. The taste of victory was bitter, tempered by the cost in human lives. But she felt a grim satisfaction in what they had accomplished. "Admiral," Colonel Webb reported, "we're receiving communications from surviving Devourer vessels. They appear to be attempting to establish communication protocols." Chen raised an eyebrow. "They want to talk?" "According to our translation systems, they're requesting clarification of human tactical objectives and strategic parameters." "For the first time since the battle began," Chen smiled. "Tell them," she said, "that our tactical objective is their complete elimination, and our strategic parameter is whatever it takes to achieve that goal." The message was transmitted, and the response came back within minutes. "Admiral," Webb said with obvious amazement, "the remaining Devourer vessels are retreating. They're withdrawing from the engagement zone entirely." Admiral Vexhai's voice crackled through the communication array from the Galactic fleet. "Admiral Chen, this is unprecedented. The Devourers have never withdrawn from an engagement. Their programming doesn't include retreat protocols." "Maybe," Chen replied. "Their programming finally encountered something it couldn't process. A species that fights wars not to win battles, but to completely destroy the enemy's will to continue fighting." The Devourer retreat marked the first tactical victory against the ancient enemy in galactic history. But as Chen studied the tactical data from the engagement, she realized this was only the beginning. The Devourers would adapt their programming to counter human tactics. They would analyze the recorded engagement and develop new strategies designed specifically to neutralize humanity's chaotic approach to warfare. But they had made a fundamental error in their calculations. They assumed that human tactical doctrine was fixed, that it could be analyzed and countered like any other military system. They didn't understand that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their ships or their weapons. It was their absolute refusal to fight, the same way twice. The War Council convened in the ruins of what had once been the Devourer command vessel, its twisted metal corridors now serving as an improvised meeting space for the combined galactic leadership. 3 months had passed since the first engagement, and the conflict had evolved in ways that none of the participants had anticipated. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before a holographic display showing the current tactical situation across 17 star systems. The Devourers had indeed adapted their programming to counter human chaos tactics, developing new strategies based on predictive analysis of human behavioral patterns. But humanity had responded with something that machine intelligence couldn't process. They had changed their fundamental approach to warfare entirely. "The enemy's adaptation protocols are more sophisticated than we initially assessed," reported Admiral Zirion, his mechanical form bearing new scars from recent engagements.
"They've developed countermeasures for every human tactic we've employed, and their response time to new strategies has decreased exponentially."
High Counselor Zethkara's crystalline features reflected the stress of prolonged conflict. Their latest offensive destroyed the Rigelian defense grid and eliminated 3 of our most advanced battle groups. "Even with human tactical support, our forces are taking unsustainable casualties." Chen nodded grimly. The Devourers had proven more adaptable than anyone expected. After analyzing human tactics from the first engagement, they had modified their programming to anticipate chaos, randomness, and unconventional strategies. They now deployed countermeasures for every innovative tactic humanity employed, sometimes before the humans themselves had fully implemented their plans. The problem, Chen said, is that we've been fighting their adaptation with more of the same innovation. They learn our new tactics, we develop newer ones, they learn those, and the cycle continues. But machine learning has limitations that we haven't been exploiting.
What do you mean?
Asked Commander Torval, whose warrior clan vessels had suffered heavy losses in the recent fighting. Artificial intelligence, no matter how sophisticated, fundamentally operates by recognizing patterns and optimizing responses. Chen explained. It learns by analyzing what we do and predicting what we might do next. But what if we did something that couldn't be predicted because it had never been done before? Admiral Vexai leaned forward with interest. You're suggesting tactics that have no historical precedent? I'm suggesting we stop thinking about this as a military conflict entirely, Chen replied. The Devourers are machines designed to consume and expand. Their entire strategic framework is based on combat operations, resource acquisition, and territorial control. But what if we introduced objectives that don't fit into any of those categories? The alien commanders exchanged confused glances, and Chen realized she needed to explain human strategic thinking in terms they could understand. Every war humanity has ever fought has been between thinking opponents who could be negotiated with, reasoned with, or intimidated into changing their behavior. The Devourers can't be reasoned with, but they can be confused. They're programmed to optimize their operations, but optimization requires consistent objectives. What happens if we make their objectives inconsistent? Colonel Webb, monitoring the discussion from his position aboard the Indomitable, provided tactical analysis through the communication link. Admiral, are you suggesting we target their programming rather than their ships? I'm suggesting we target their purpose, Chen replied.
The Devourers exist to consume resources and expand their influence.
Everything they do serves that function. But consumption and expansion require predictable inputs and measurable outputs. What if we made their inputs unpredictable and their outputs meaningless? Dr. Elizabeth Vance, participating in the conference via Quantum Link from Earth's Strategic Research Division, had been analyzing Devourer behavioral patterns since the war began. Admiral, I think I understand what you're proposing. Instead of fighting them militarily, we could attack the logical foundations of their operational programming. Exactly. We've been trying to outfight machines that were designed for combat. But machines that were designed for consumption might be vulnerable to something entirely different. Chen activated her tactical display, showing deployment patterns for what she had designated as Operation Ouroboros. Phase 1 involves the complete abandonment of traditional military objectives, she began. Instead of defending territory or protecting resources, we're going to make resource acquisition meaningless for the Devourers. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Human forces would begin targeting not Devourer ships, but the resources they were attempting to consume. Every planet, asteroid, and space station in the path of the Devourer advance would be systematically destroyed by human engineering teams before the enemy could acquire them. You're proposing to destroy entire star systems? Admiral Vexai asked in shock. Only the uninhabited ones, Chen replied, and only in a way that makes them useless to the Devourers while preserving the possibility of future restoration. We're not committing genocide. We're committing strategic resource denial on a galactic scale. Admiral Zirium processed the implications through his tactical analysis systems. This would eliminate the Devourer's ability to acquire raw materials for fleet expansion, but it would also eliminate those resources for galactic civilization. Temporarily, Dr. Vance interjected. Human engineering teams have developed techniques for resource dispersal that scatter useful materials across vast areas of space. The resources still exist, but they're distributed in patterns that make collection inefficient for automated systems, while remaining recoverable for manual operations. Commander Torval began to grasp the strategic implications. The Devourers would be forced to choose between advancing toward heavily defended core worlds or remaining in resource-depleted sectors where they cannot expand their forces. That's Phase 2, Chen continued. While they're dealing with resource scarcity, we implement what Dr. Vance calls logical paradox warfare. We present them with situations that their programming cannot resolve because the optimal solution changes depending on how they approach the problem. She displayed tactical scenarios that looked more like mathematical puzzles than military operations. Human forces would establish defensive positions that became stronger when attacked directly, but weaker when ignored. Resource deposits would be defended by systems that only activated when the resources were being consumed, but that shut down when left alone. We're going to make their optimization algorithms chase their own tails, Chen explained. Every time they identify the optimal solution to a tactical problem, we'll change the parameters so that the optimal solution becomes suboptimal. The alien commanders struggled to process strategic thinking that violated every principle of military logic they understood. Warfare, in their experience, was about achieving objectives through superior force or superior tactics. What Chen was proposing was about making objectives meaningless. Phase 3 is the most important, Chen continued. While their tactical computers are overloaded trying to solve unsolvable problems, we implement what humanity calls total warfare. Not military combat, but comprehensive systematic disruption of everything they're trying to accomplish. She showed them plans for operations that would have been considered impossible by galactic standards. Human forces would begin actively pursuing Devourer ships not to destroy them, but to capture them. Captured vessels would be modified and released with programming designed to interfere with fleet coordination. Resource deposits would be seeded with materials that would contaminate Devourer manufacturing processes. You're talking about biological warfare against machines, Admiral Zirian observed. We're talking about introducing chaos into their ordered systems, Chen corrected. Viruses that affect their communication networks, materials that interfere with their construction processes, and tactical situations that require responses that contradict their basic programming. Dr. Vance provided technical details through the quantum link. We've developed what we call logic bombs, programming fragments that cause Devourer tactical computers to enter recursive loops when they encounter specific scenarios. They're not destructive in the conventional sense, but they consume processing power exponentially. The scope of the human strategy was beginning to overwhelm the galactic commanders. They were discussing the systematic disruption of an entire galactic invasion through methods that weren't really military operations in any recognizable sense. What you're describing, High Counselor Zeth Kara said slowly, isn't warfare. It's the deliberate introduction of chaos into an ordered system. Yes, Chen replied simply. It's what humans do best. The implementation of Operation Ouroboros began immediately, with human engineering teams deploying across 43 star systems to begin resource dispersal operations. The work was dangerous, requiring teams to operate in sectors that might be overrun by Devourer forces at any moment, but humanity approached the task with the same systematic thoroughness they brought to all their military operations. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, transferred to command of the engineering vessel TCS Architect, found herself leading teams that were literally dismantling asteroid belts and redistributing the materials in patterns that looked like natural cosmic phenomena. The work was tedious and exhausting, but the strategic implications were profound. It's like we're teaching the galaxy how to fight dirty, she reported to Admiral Chen during one of their regular tactical briefings. The alien engineering teams are having trouble adapting to operations that deliberately destroy valuable resources.
They think like civilized beings, Chen replied.
They can't conceive of destroying something valuable just to deny it to the enemy. But that's because they've never had to fight for their species' survival against an opponent that couldn't be reasoned with. The Devourer's response to Phase 1 was swift and predictable. They accelerated their advance toward the core worlds, attempting to acquire resources before human teams could disperse them. But this played directly into Phase 2 of the human strategy. As Devourer forces concentrated on rapid advancement, they encountered the logical paradox systems that human engineers had deployed throughout their path. Defense platforms that strengthened when attacked, resource sites that became more valuable when ignored, communication networks that functioned properly only when they weren't being used for tactical coordination. The effect on Devourer tactical computers was immediate and devastating. Systems designed for logical optimization began consuming enormous amounts of processing power trying to solve problems that had no stable solutions. Fleet coordination began breaking down as individual ships received conflicting tactical data from their central processors. Captain Sarah Kim, of the TCS Paradox, had volunteered to pilot the first logic bomb delivery mission, a task that required her to allow her ship to be captured by Devourer forces so that the contaminated programming could be introduced into their network. The mission was essentially suicidal, but Kim approached it with the casual professionalism that characterized humanity's approach to impossible operations. Logic bomb deployed successfully, she reported through her final transmission. Enemy vessels in this sector are showing signs of systematic processing conflicts. Recommend immediate implementation of Phase 3 while they're distracted. Kim's sacrifice was one of hundreds that characterized the final phase of Operation Ouroboros. Human crews volunteered for missions that had virtually no survival probability, but that would introduce chaos into Devourer operations at critical moments. The cumulative effect was unprecedented in galactic military history. The Devourer fleet, designed to function as a perfectly coordinated machine intelligence, began displaying behaviors that could only be described as neurotic. Ships would advance toward objectives, then retreat for no apparent tactical reason. Resource acquisition operations would begin efficiently, then shut down halfway through completion. Communications between vessels became erratic and contradictory. They're having what humans would call a nervous breakdown, Dr. Bill Vance reported during the final tactical assessment. Their programming is caught in recursive loops, trying to optimize for contradictory objectives. They literally cannot function effectively because they can't determine what effectively means in the current operational environment. The end came not with a climactic battle, but with what could only be described as mechanical confusion. The Devourer fleet simply stopped advancing. Individual ships continued operating, but without coordination or apparent purpose. Some began consuming their own resources to fuel operations that served no strategic function. Others shut down entirely, as if their tactical computers had given up trying to solve unsolvable problems. They're still dangerous, Admiral Sirian warned during the victory assessment. Individual vessels retain full combat capability, but they no longer function as a coherent force. Admiral Chen stood in the observation deck of the Indomitable, watching scattered Devourer ships drift aimlessly through space like the remnants of a shattered mind. The victory was complete, but it felt different from anything humanity had achieved in their violent history. They hadn't defeated an enemy through superior force or tactical brilliance. They had defeated them through superior confusion. Admiral, Colonel Webb reported, we're receiving surrender communications from several Devourer vessels. They appear to be requesting new operational parameters. Chen smiled, but there was no cruelty in it. Tell them their new operational parameters are to integrate peaceful resource acquisition protocols with galactic civilization standards. And Marcus, make sure they understand that these parameters are non-negotiable and permanent. The war was over, but the implications were just beginning. Humanity had introduced the galaxy to strategic concepts that transcended military conflict entirely. They had demonstrated that the most dangerous enemy wasn't necessarily the one with superior firepower, but the one willing to completely redefine the nature of the conflict itself. High Counselor Zivkara transmitted a formal message to Earth's leadership 3 days after the Devourer capitulation. The Galactic Council hereby extends full membership to humanity, with recognition as a sovereign military power. We also formally request that Earth establish permanent tactical advisory positions within galactic defense forces. Your species has demonstrated strategic capabilities that we believe will be essential for addressing future threats to galactic security. Admiral Chen read the message with satisfaction. Humanity had achieved everything they hoped for when they first received the galactic distress call. They had proven themselves as equals, protected galactic civilization, and established their place among the stars. But more importantly, they had taught the galaxy something that would reshape interstellar politics for generations to come. Sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem was to refuse to accept that it was impossible in the first place. The Devourers had learned this lesson the hard way. They had encountered a species that approached warfare not as a science to be perfected, but as an art to be continuously reinvented. And in the end, their sophisticated algorithms had been defeated by humanity's most fundamental characteristic: the absolute refusal to fight fair when the stakes were high enough. Earth's combat fleet began the long journey home, leaving behind a galaxy that was safer, wiser, and considerably more respectful of the species that had once been dismissed as primitive warmongers. The Devourers, for their part, gradually began integrating into galactic society as automated resource processing systems, their programming permanently modified to serve peaceful purposes. They became a reminder of what could happen when machine intelligence encountered human ingenuity and why artificial optimization would never be a substitute for organic creativity. And across the galaxy, military academies began teaching a new strategic principle that would become known as the human doctrine. When facing an impossible enemy, the key to victory is not to become better at fighting them, but to make them worse at fighting you. The galaxy had called for help, and humanity had answered. But in saving galactic civilization, they had also fundamentally changed what galactic civilization understood about the nature of conflict itself. The age of predictable warfare was over. The age of human strategy had begun.